Hello, and welcome everyone to today's digital live event, New York State of Mind, Conversation on Real Estate and Innovation. My name is Ashkan Zandia, Chief Intelligence Officer and Global Head of Real Estate Technology Intelligence here at CRETech, and I'm excited to be your host today. We're excited to be partnering with Rebney in this limited virtual series covering critical topics in real estate. Rebney Tech gathers real estate experts on the premise of identifying the most pressing challenges in real estate and collectively assessing the existing technology landscape to surface best-in-class technology solutions to those challenges. Rebney Tech builds relationships and breaks down knowledge silos between the real estate, venture capital, and startup communities to facilitate innovation. In a few minutes, we will hear from the most insightful and active leaders in real estate and telecommunications as we discuss CBRS, connectivity and technology infrastructure. Our discussion will shed light on what every building owner needs to know about CBRS, what it is, its use cases and value proposition, economic considerations, and most importantly, how to take advantage of it. While we're waiting for everyone to take their digital seats, I want to quickly thank the Real Estate Board of New York for helping us and partnering with us in this limited series. To check out more of the past events that we've had, part 1 and part 2. Part 1, building safely in today's environment. Part 2, work from work, reentry in the future of office. And part 3, CBRS. Please check us out at cretech.com/events. With that said, I see we have a large crowd gathering, so let's just get the show on the road. It's my pleasure to introduce some of the most esteemed legends and most successful people in the real estate industry, starting with our moderator today, John Gilbert, Chief Operating Officer, Executive Vice President, and CTO of Rudent Management. Rod Nelson, CEO and co-founder of Geoverse. John Miko, Director of Engineering of North America WiredScore. Darlene Pope, VP of Global Smart Building Operations at WeWork. Paul Reddick, VP Strategy and Business Development at Crown Castle. And Rich Berliner, founder and publisher of 5th Gen Media, Connected Real Estate Magazine. John, the digital stage is now yours.
Ash, thanks so much. And thank you all for joining us today, and especially to the all-star panel that we've lined up here. We're going to talk about a subject that a lot of people don't know about, and that's CBRS. And also talk within the context of, what do owners need to do ultimately to their buildings from an infrastructure standpoint to support the technological needs and use cases that our customers are looking for. I think the customers are going to be excited to hear about how CBRS can enhance a lot of the things that they've been thinking about, and then ultimately try to get into how does this work, what's happening, where do we go from here, and ultimately where owners and tenants, as well as the brokerage community, should be researching this issue. Darlene Pope is with us from WeWork. Darlene's as one of the largest occupier, I think the largest occupier of space in the city of New York, is going to help us walk through what tenants are really looking for. We've got a couple of folks, both Rich Berliner and John Miko, who take a 30,000 view of the world and look down at real estate in the big picture. And then ultimately, we've got two terrific folks, Rod Nelson and Paul Reddick, who are really kind of in the ropes of the CBRS game. So I'm excited about the focus on this. I first started reading about CBRS when the FCC began deliberations on freeing up this spectrum and ultimately gifting it to property owners. So I'm going to start with Rich Berliner. Rich, what the heck is CBRS? What does it mean to owners and tenants, and ultimately the economic growth of the city of New York?
Gotcha. Well, thank you, John. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and you and I have been discussing for quite a while. So let me stress, first of all, CBRS is not a technology. It's a frequency band that was previously and up to now and still used by the Navy, mostly offshore, of course, not a lot of naval ships in the Midwest, but was used on the coasts for radar. And it's the 3.5 to 3.7 frequency band. And it's a spectrum band that has now been given to the all the users that want to use it on an unlicensed and licensed basis. There are auctions for the licensed portion coming up, but from right now, it is an unlicensed set of frequencies that a building owner, a landlord, a REIT can use to cover their building using this frequency and to own a private network within that building. So to take an unlicensed set of frequencies and use it for their own purpose to direct communications in their building. So the important thing is that this frequency, these set of frequencies, because they were used by the Navy, need something called a spectrum access system administrator, or a series of those, to actually sort of create a system whereby there isn't interference created when someone wants to use a channel, and therefore these system access the spectrum access system administrators actually assign frequencies so that isn't overlap amongst different users. So the good news on this is that it's something that could be extremely helpful to a landlord, especially in the return to work mode, that they can own, they can manage themselves, they can use it to do IoT on a private basis, so they're not paying someone $1 a month or $6 a month per device to manage their system, but they can use it for many, many different things, and it's a network that they can own, you can own, and so I think that's the high line of it. And so what's important for New York real estate owners to understand is this could change the game in terms of how much control and how much access they have to their own data. And I hope that covers it as a good basis for everybody to understand.
Well, I want to bring Paul and Rod into this conversation. You know, Paul, how much spectrum is 150 megahertz? How big is this pipe?
Yeah, so first off, if you look at 150 megahertz, that's virtually more spectrum than each carrier individually owns today. So it's really almost feels limitless compared to what we're used to in terms of wireless capacity constraints. I think the only way you're ever going to exhaust this type of spectrum in a building is if you're doing a massive amount of video from hundreds of devices simultaneously. So it really unleashes a lot of spectrum, and I like the way you put it, John. It was a gift to the real estate industry. It's a gift to many at large that this spectrum was made available, and it was democratized so that you can use it without having to go into an auction to get the spectrum. That's a very important piece of this.
Rod, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to think of a way to express, how much this is, and I had the opportunity to participate in the first big wave of growth in the cellular industry as the chief technology officer at AT&T Wireless back in the 90s, when the industry really built out for the first time, and we did that with basically 25 megahertz of spectrum to run the whole company on a nationwide network, and even the biggest cities like all of New York. And now you have 5 times that amount of spectrum that's available for a single building. I think that's really mind-blowing to think, 5 times the spectrum that we're able to build a billion-dollar industry on is now available to take advantage of in each property owner's location.
Now, I was always raised, you never look a gift horse in the mouth. But can Paul and Rod, can you fill us in on what you interpret the FCC's thinking on this was, and what their goals were when they began to unleash this frequency and gift it to property owners?
Yeah, John, I can take a shot at that. So before coming to Crown Castle, I worked at Google and worked directly for a gentleman named Milo Medin. He and a number of others, Eric Smith from Google, others were included on a President's Council for Science and Technology back in 2012, and they recommended that to kind of break up the fact that there's only a few, the proud, that have spectrum today and operate national networks, including one of my former employers and one of Rod's former employers, would free up the spectrum and democratize it so that smaller players could enter the business, smaller players geographically could enter the business, so that people that own real estate and kind of a natural monopoly of their little space could use the spectrum to do things that are 4G LTE and 5G without having to rely on wireless carriers who, frankly, have spent billions of dollars to get spectrum in the past. So it's democratizing it and making it available. So that was a big policy decision for the FCC that drove the opening up of this spectrum.
And then I think there was an interesting balance. That was originally called the innovation band, I think was one of the labels. And fortunately, that idea kept its way through the whole process. But at the same time, I think the FCC did a good job of balancing, that with the traditional carrier needs. And, now we see strong support among all of the MNOs for the band. We see strong support from all of the handset OEMs, which we all need, right? To be able to take maximum advantage of the spectrum. We needed the big carriers to support it as well. And, they all have. And so the ecosystem of devices, handsets, IoT modems, you name it, is really exploding, and the support from the carriers is strong in terms of using the band as well.
Well, let's talk about that for a second in terms of the hardware. Is there a CBRS chip that is in new phones and in iPads? And, what are the mobile network operators doing ultimately to influence the manufacturing of devices that can ultimately feed off of this spectrum?
Well, the good news is that, it's not a new chip, right? This is just another frequency band that sits along all the others. I mean, I don't know, the latest iPhones and iPads probably have 40 some odd different LTE frequencies, and CBRS is one of those. It happens that the 3.5 gig spectrum is harmonized around the world. And so there's this huge ecosystem to drive the development of silicon, and the CBRS frequency is just one more band in all these multi-band phones. And the carriers have supported it by writing into their purchase requirements, hey, your phones need to support this frequency, starting with flagships like the Galaxy S10 and iPhone 11, and then moving down throughout the whole range.
Yeah, Rod, I mentioned another technology in parallel that's helping this is dual SIM, dual standby, so having dual SIMs in phones. So when a carrier deploys a CBRS band, they'll manage that on their own. But if you are a building owner, for example, and you had private LTE and you wanted to pull that traffic and run it off for your customers, you can have that's also talking simultaneously to the carrier network. So it'll go to the carrier network if it needs to, or it can pop onto a private network that you've installed in your building. So that technology on the handset side also complements.
So Tip O'Neill used to say that all politics is local. I like to say that all telecommunications is local. So what it sounds like to me that the FCC is doing is really going directly to the customer, identifying a huge swatch of spectrum where a bunch of different use cases can ultimately be enabled, and allowing building owners who, let's face it, building owners are not considered the technological innovators that we need to be ultimately, but giving them something, a tool, an amazing tool that can ultimately help attract customers and ultimately enhance the infrastructure within their buildings to do things that they could never do before. So I wanted to, John Miko, can you respond to that a little bit? And I want to bring Rich into this conversation, and then I want Darlene to talk about what this means to a large user like we were.
Yeah, I would say for me, the widest application set here is really in the IoT and smart building space. And at a building level, a network like CBRS can really kind of serve as that platform for a lot of those technology deployments. One of the major barriers to entry that we've seen for many buildings to adopt smart technologies around, connectivity. How do I connect and aggregate, data from all my edge devices, all the building systems that I have operating, whether that's HVAC, security cameras, occupancy sensors, you name it. The traditional use of Wi-Fi is disruptive to tenant networks, difficult to implement when you have, a multi-tenant office building where everyone has their own proprietary network. And that also poses security challenges. Whereas if you take a physical approach to cabled infrastructure like power over Ethernet, that becomes really cost prohibitive to connect to all of those edge devices. So for me, CBRS can solve a lot of those challenges as it gives you the performance benefits of the wired connections, with better security than Wi-Fi. And security is kind of that, that linchpin within this puzzle. I mean, it's a hurdle that every enterprise needs to overcome. Anytime that you're introducing more connected devices into the workplace, it obviously opens up your attack surface for hackers. So, having a secure converged infrastructure like CBRS to plug into can really lower that barrier to technology adoption and to make, smart technology deployments, less of a forklift upgrade and more of a plug and play scalable solution.
And why is CBRS more secure than perhaps Wi-Fi?
Yeah, so it comes down to the authentication. So it's a two-way handshake where, the device recognizes the network and the network recognizes the device, whereas Wi-Fi is more encryption based. The handoff within there as well is really just a cleaner process. So, within that mission critical connectivity, when you're talking about right now where we're seeing this deployed on the factory floor where you have autonomous robots and machines that are connected to each other, that handoff is really critical and the security of that handoff is really critical. So, this is kind of purpose built for that type of use case, whereas Wi-Fi was really designed for ease of access. How can we deploy this very quickly and get people connected to the network?
And Rich, you publish a very important periodical that the industry is that brings together connectivity and real estate. You want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I think, John, there are a couple of really big buckets, and I agree with what John said about how this fits in to the ecosystem. I think there are a couple of really big buckets for hospitals and healthcare is a really important one. The other really important use here is as a way to eliminate wires when you have to go from place to place and it's very expensive or inappropriate to start digging up a parking lot. So the American Dream Entertainment Center here in New Jersey, perfect example, they forgot to put signage into the parking lots. So when a Giant game gets out at 4 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon and the mall is open, they would have 40,000 people trying to go into the same direction. So instead of digging up the parking lot and running fiber for $3 or $4 million, they were able to use CBRS as a way to control the signage. And then there's really another important bucket, which is the advertising piece to this. I agree that IoT is a very important piece, but I think advertising and using CBRS inside buildings and inside venues will be a very important part of the ecosystem down the road. I think that is something that people are going to look at, but not from initially when we deploy CBRS at the early stage, but as we go down the road, people are going to say, I could be using this for something even more powerful. And I think that's what CBRS will kind of morph into. And so later on, we're going to talk a little bit about examples, some advertising examples and things, but I think those are the big buckets. And certainly private communications for folks like you at Rudin, to be able to use this as a way to own your own network, to control your own data, and to use this to figure out what's going on with your IoT sensors and all those other things.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we've seen, obviously, with COVID is that our lobbies are totally been changed in terms of what they're going to be used for. They used to be pass-throughs. Now suddenly they're the demilitarized zone, right? We're doing thermal scanning. We're making sure security. We're queuing up. We're limiting the number of people on our elevators. And the amount of bandwidth that we're going to need as people are standing in line ultimately to connect to a Zoom, a team, Microsoft Teams, just stay on a cell call is going to increase dramatically. And CBRS totally changes that in a positive way. The other thing that we saw and have seen with our operating system, Nantum, and our software company, Prescriptive Data, is that we kept bumping up against our customers' networks. And I don't want to touch that network. They don't want me touching that network. So then the choice is, okay, I got to build a parallel network. Well, now I've got free spectrum, and CBRS ultimately comes in so that if I want to be grabbing data inside that tenant space, I have my own opportunity to grab that and create that network without any interference, grab that data. And one thing we've learned from COVID, the more granular data we can get, the more valuable it is, as we can, adjust that in terms of time stamping it and ultimately getting to, all the location-based services that Darlene's going to talk about right now.
Stealing my thunder there, John. Yeah, so when you look at, from my perspective, obviously we work one of the largest tenants in New York City, but also one of the largest landlords in New York City. Because at the end of the day, we're focused on three major buckets: member experience, product, and operations. And when you look at CBRS, CBRS becomes a tool in the toolbox, right? It's not the be all and end all. From our perspective, it's really, you need to look at a hybrid of technologies depending upon the specific building, the existing infrastructure, and really put together the strategy around data collection. Because you always have to start with why. Why are we collecting the data? What are we going to be using the data for? What is the strategy? What is the plan? What are you trying to solve for? And so in terms of use cases, you've got to look at data in terms of collecting, aggregating, integrating, and using. Some of the use cases, I think, across the board, the number one use case we should all be trying to solve for right now is occupancy. Occupancy detection, not just badge swipe data, how many people came into the building today, because you find that data isn't accurate. But when you look at things like COVID and de-densification and understanding how many people are we allowed to let into the building today, not just swiping in through the main entrance, but floor by floor, zone by zone, room by room, to not be able to access that data and to not really understand use of your space, in my opinion right now, is probably the biggest obstacle and the biggest challenge that we face, not only as real estate owners, but also as tenants within those facilities. So I think that occupancy, number one use case to solve for. We've documented more than 50 different use cases for occupancy within our facilities. Everything from, are we COVID compliant in terms of de-densification, to how many people are allowed in an elevator, how many people are allowed in a conference room. Is there a phone booth available on the 5th floor right now that I can go up and use? John, we used to talk about running the buildings based on real-time occupancy. And now with COVID, we're running the buildings, in a much, many more hours, more filtration. Being able to turn on a dime and change your building operations when your business drivers change is absolutely critical to being able to obtain and aggregate that data, and then also being able to control the building accordingly. So when you look at things like IoT devices, anything that can be connected to the internet is an IoT device. VAV boxes, fans, dampers, sensors, occupancy, mobile apps, right? It still appalls me that we're in 2020 and we still don't have buildings where you can get ubiquitous cell phone coverage within your facility. But when you start to look at, John, you touched upon it briefly, location-based services, I think it's going to be the future of real estate. When you look at tenant experience, member experience, look at how you live outside the building. Everything is location-based. Everything is find a restaurant near me now. Everything is GPS, where are you, who are you, what do you like, what do you want, and yet you walk into the buildings and all that goes away. So if we can start to apply the same mentality inside the building and be able to provide location-based services based on who you are, what you like, what temperature you want your office, how you like your lighting, and that gives us also the occupancy data that we're looking for, because now we can start to count number of devices within the facility, identify that with number of people, identify location of people within the space, and then that starts to support all the different use cases that we're trying to solve for.
Yeah, we just launched, Nantum launched a new app today where our customers within the Rudin-owned buildings will ultimately be able to get off the subway and literally see what is the lobby condition from a wait time standpoint to get on an elevator. They're also going to get real-time data in terms of understanding indoor air quality. So this is just beginning, just evolving, but all those things are happening right now.
Yeah, it's absolutely time to use today's technology as a way to operate our buildings better.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I wonder if I could pile on to a comment that Darlene made. So when we look at all these different use cases you as a building owner might have, for example, one thing that's really important to understand is they're not exclusive, and you don't have to build a business case for installing all this infrastructure for one use case. Darlene mentioned many as a building owner, but she also mentioned the fact that carriers don't have good coverage in buildings. The same radio that you use to run Nantum, your operating system for the building, can be used for Verizon or a T-Mobile to get better coverage in the building. So I mentioned the dual SIM handsets. It can be used by your tenants, and all of that can be virtualized and separated out. So that one infrastructure cost that you incur for putting this in the first time can be amortized across all of these use cases. So it's almost like you're sub-optimizing if you just buy CBRS radios to do one thing.
Well, let's talk about that, because I think that's really important. You know, as and maybe turn to Rod and Paul on this to really, you know, paint a clear picture. Talk to me about this infrastructure and how it's different than from Wi-Fi, how it can enable 5G, and ultimately how carriers, whether, you know, and working with the property owners, can ultimately segment this huge pipe and provide new value-added services to the customers in our buildings.
Yeah, I think that's you know, good. I wanted to echo one of the comments that you had made, which is that this is an opportunity to build a parallel network, you know, that doesn't interfere with your own tenants' Wi-Fi networks. And I think that's a just critically important point to reiterate. And the other thing which Paul said is the dual purpose of this radio network is critical to the ROI. And at Geoverse, that's what we, you know, specialize in helping our customers do, is realize that dual purpose for the spectrum and the radio network that's installed. You know, firstly, it's a general purpose connectivity platform for lots of business applications that we've been talking about that support the building owners' operations and the tenant experience. But it's also what we call a neutral host network that's capable of hosting the subscribers from Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. And, you know, all that app-based communication with your tenants and occupants is going to rely upon there being a robust coverage within the building so that that information can get to the employee in the building when they need it. And so that dual purpose here is really what sets it apart from Wi-Fi. You know, a Wi-Fi network, it has not really demonstrated itself as an offload mechanism for carrier traffic in a big way, but this is cellular. This is just another cellular frequency band. You know, it's much more natural for the carriers to offload their traffic to this technology than say Wi-Fi.
And Paul, what does that mean to, you know, a large media company? How can they use this?
Yeah, so the idea would be that they can use it in terms of deploying it for everything we've talked about, for building management, for distribution of media over a wireless network, through offering services for tenants so that they could even build up their own private networks inside the buildings. And then additionally, it means that all the guests and employees and others that come into your space can have better mobile network coverage as well. So you can do all of that simultaneously. And I would just comment that the real reason Crown Castle has any interest in this is that we invest in shared assets. So we look at putting money to work, and if a company like Geoverse enables this to be shared across multiple players, we're willing to come in and make the investment and then amortize it across multiple players, because that's what we've done in the telecom space for over 20 years.
Now, John Miko, help me sort this out. We've got DAS systems, we've got Wi-Fi, now we've got CBRS. How does CBRS fit into, you know, this nomenclature of technology that may be already deployed in a building or may not be?
Yeah, I think it's new technology that's complementary to a lot of the existing infrastructure that we see in place, whether that's, DAS, Wi-Fi, low powered, wide area, sensor networks, connectivity that's wired. I don't think that these technologies are going to be replaced by CBRS. Wi-Fi specifically, I think is going to be common denominator in the enterprise environment for many years to come. Traditional DAS right now that we have being deployed across North America, is a challenge for building owners. It's a massive headache to get carrier interest in buildings and get them to provide their signal source. Tenants are driving this conversation. Tenants like WeWork, large occupiers are putting in lease language that has, specific requirements for cellular coverage indoors. And building owners basically are at a place where they have to invest in the infrastructure to appease tenants, but also pay the carriers for signal source, which is completely out of whack within the ecosystem. If you have a lease requirement to provide coverage for specifically AT&T in Midtown Manhattan, and AT&T doesn't have your list in its queue of priority buildings to connect to, you're paying them to provide, essentially their customers with a quality experience. So CBRS has the potential to really kind of change, for me, that in-building mobile landscape and alleviate a lot of those headaches that building owners are up against. But I think early days, with what we see these initial use cases as, it's really going to be a multi-purpose tool in the toolbox that you can use for the right applications to start, and then leverage further as time goes on. So an additive technology that you could further take advantage of. Something like security cameras, wireless security cameras that I want connected to all areas of my buildings. That's something that I want, partitioned away from my Wi-Fi network, from my other networks within the building. So that's a great fit for private LTE. Whereas something like, connecting my laptop in the building's cafeteria, I'm okay with using the traditional Wi-Fi network. So, I think it fits into the existing ecosystem in a really nice way, but has massive amounts of potential to really kind of flip a lot of those inefficiencies on their head, because it is so multifunctional and multi-purpose from a building technology standpoint.
Well, and again,
So Rich,
just to pile on top of
ahead,
that.
Darlene.
No, I was just to say, just to add to that, again, CBRS is a tool in the toolbox, but if you look at a truly smart building and the terabytes of data, and we're not talking about static data, we're talking about time series, real-time data, whether it's temperature, whether it's occupancy, whether it's CO2, whether it's operational data, whether it's energy data, being able to pull that out real time and being able to process that on-prem real time takes a tremendous amount of bandwidth and capacity. And so, and I agree with you, a lot of attempts have failed in the past because people have attempted to either run over the enterprise network or they've interfered with tenant networks. And so if you can look at CBRS as an opportunity to kind of separate out the building operational data and be able to run that over a private network, I think this is a game changer.
Yeah, and the nice
And
thing
what are
about
the
it
things
is,
that you think? Go ahead, John.
sorry, I was going to say, the nice thing about it is that it's such a big pipe that you can slice it and dice it and segment that network in a way that you would, traditionally in the same way with Wi-Fi. So, it's flexible in that it doesn't need to be a singular use case to start. It can be something that you're using to address, multiple different use cases within the building.
But Darlene, are there things that you will now be able to do in a CBRS enabled building that you currently can't do?
Well, I always say if it isn't connected, it isn't smart. And, most owners and most enterprise clients. And, the other thing I wanted to mention before I answer that is that there's a lot of different building types and building ownership types. You've got your multi-tenant, you've got your corporate owner occupiers, you've got mixed use, you've got retail. So there's a lot of different use cases that we're talking about across the board here. But, when you're looking at the primary use cases for something like this, if it isn't connected, it isn't smart. So the ability to take data from different systems and aggregate it and share it and start to do correlations among multiple use cases or multiple data sets, that's something that most owners and most enterprise clients haven't done before, right? What you typically see are disparate independent systems. You've got your HVAC network, you've got your lighting network, you've got your access control network, you've got your CCTV network, you've got your occupancy detection network, you've got all independent networks running on their own communications protocol within the building without the ability to aggregate all that data and to run it over the same network. And that's where I think CBRS provides, again, a game-changing technology to be able to pull all of those disparate networks that we are already running in all of our buildings into a common platform and into a common infrastructure, and really look at a different way of designing those networks in the first place.
Yeah, which is exactly why we created Nantum, which is a beautiful, what CBRS does is just allows an operating system like Nantum to get into spaces that it was never able to get in before, and grab that data and make it valuable. So, Rich, anything you want to add on that one?
Yeah, I think it's a very important thing to talk about what the landlord part of this equation is. And it's more than just building owners saying, oh, yeah, I want to use this for this benefit and that. If you think about it, in the wireless business, talk about this all the time, 80% of all calls and a good portion of the data, almost that amount of data, are initiated indoors. Yet, carriers now start their building of 5G and other networks outdoors. So that the role of the landlord here is in moving forward a new set of frequencies that they can be an owner of, and to make sure that we now have in-building coverage where we didn't before, where the carriers don't want to put up money to do, but the landlords are now taking over the role of expanding the wireless network in this country. And it's a major, major thing for everyone who has a phone or device of any kind. And I think it's really a terrific thing that now landlords can actually be involved in that process and don't have to be a slave to the carriers in terms of waiting around for, you know, a carrier to potentially be interested in their building, or to go through the process of getting through the engineering department or ordering equipment and waiting 12 months. So this is really very freeing for landlords in terms of not being under the carrier's thumb in this day and age. And so I think that you'll see landlords becoming much more of a part of the communications infrastructure in this country than they've ever been before. Just from some of the use cases we were talking about, again, we talk about office space a lot on these calls, but you know, hospitals are buildings too. And so a lot of folks that were unfortunately hospitalized for COVID were checked in and given an iPad, and that was their communication situation. All their medical information was put in that, all their outbound communications with their families, communications with their doctors. So the opportunity to use this for something that's, you know, that uplifting and helpful in society is really important. But you're going to see, as we talked about the American Dream complex, you're going to see it being used for things that Darlene was laying out for us, but you're also going to see a massive amount of advertising. Jay Floyd from MGM was on a webinar we did for Connected Real Estate. We did a webinar where he talked about what they were going to use it for in casinos, that if there were extra tickets left for a show, that they were going to be able to broadcast that to people in the casino, that they would be able to gather data on you know, who had a room in the hotel, who didn't. And he didn't talk specifics about what they were looking to use it for, didn't give away the secret sauce, but kind of intimated it lots of opportunities that MGM and others would be able to have better connections with their own client base there. So I think, John, I think the important thing for everybody listening in on this is to understand how important their role is now in the future of communications in building.
Yeah.
But Rich, 5G is here, and it's ubiquitous and it's everywhere. Why should I put in CBRS? Because 5G is right around the corner or already here.
That's a great question, and the answer is I don't know about you, John, but I'm not getting any 5G signal where I am, and I'm not seeing 5G signal in a lot of places. But the beauty of CBRS is that it can be your gateway to 5G in your building.
Yeah.
And that is the key element here when people ask about 5G, is it's going to be the opportunity from either a software-defined radio or adding some hardware to this, that you will have 5G and you can run it over this CBRS frequency.
Yeah.
So you asked the right question, John. It's the gateway here for your 5G, solving a private network issue and then giving you a gateway to 5G.
Right.
You can buy radios that are software upgradable. So that's one piece of advice would be, at this point in time, if you're buying CBRS radios, look for the upgrade path to 5G from the vendors you're buying from. Some of them already have software upgrades. So.
Yeah.
And the historical approach of building communication networks from the outside in has even less applicability in the 5G era, because to get this broad bandwidth and these high bandwidth experiences, you need a lot of spectrum, generally higher frequency spectrum. That doesn't penetrate through glass or walls. And so the very high band 5G that's being deployed, it's not going to appear in the building. The CBRS spectrum with the 150 megahertz of bandwidth we talked about earlier can deliver a great 5G experience and yet have the coverage that can penetrate through walls and be economically feasible in an in-building environment. So it's the perfect spectrum to have, you know, something that can be deployed economically yet deliver a really fantastic 5G experience. It's the perfect frequency band to really see the expansion of 5G indoors.
So to put that into a bullet, just real quick, then CBRS accelerates the deployment of 5G, correct?
Absolutely.
Great. Darlene.
Yeah, so I was going to say, we've talked about the landlord perspective in building operations. We've talked a little bit about what the tenants may be expecting. I think what's critical to focus on are the actual occupants, the employees, the members, and what CBRS can do to improve the experience of the occupants within the building. And I think one thing that is severely understated in the industry in general is the increased proliferation of mobile apps within the workplace. Whether it's, for room booking, temperature control, lighting control, access control, even access to CCTV video. There are so many different things that we're going to be running over apps and that we're going to need a tremendous amount of bandwidth to support. I mean, even now when you go into other facilities, you walk into an airport and you see signs that say download our app. You walk into a shopping mall, it says download our app. And then they can provide blue dot wayfinding and location-based services and personalized profiles to understand who you are and what you need. If we start to look at that within the office environment and start to look at all the different use cases that need to be supported through that type of communications infrastructure, the possibilities are literally endless. And I think we've just scraped the surface in terms of the value of that component of something like CBRS or 5G.
Great. Well, let's now, from a property owner standpoint, what does it cost to put this in? What is the infrastructure? More expensive than Wi-Fi, less expensive than Wi-Fi? How does it compare to DAS? Do I need to, if I already have a DAS, do I need CBRS? Can I use my DAS to put my CBRS in? Rod and Paul, can you talk about those questions?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at the high level, and Rod will probably come in and clean it up. But one thing I'll mention out of the gate is that in terms of the number of radios that you have to put in, roughly one a CBRS radio for every 3 Wi-Fi radios. Some of that has to do with the band, but more has to do with the technology and how efficient LTE and then 5G will be at talking to devices. But you are talking about a new set of radios. You can sometimes use some of the existing wiring that you have in place. CBRS does come with a few extra OpEx pieces, as was mentioned at the outset by Rich. I think you need to have this thing registered with something called a SAS. These are radios that come from the Nokias and Samsungs and Mavenairs and others, and they typically have some licensing costs that you have to continue to run these radios. So some of those things add up. But I would say slightly more expensive than Wi-Fi, much, much, much better than Wi-Fi, and much cheaper and more efficient at indoor coverage than DAS. So I call it the Goldilocks. It's kind of just right.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect description, Paul. I think, on those OpEx pieces, what we aim to do is to simplify that, right? So that the building owners or other users don't need to try to navigate the labyrinth of those licenses from the radio vendors or the SAS fees or other components there, right? So, I think it's possible to have all those benefits and yet mask, any potential complexity through providing a managed service that, is going to deliver a great multi-purpose, network asset. And again, just, I think that multi-purpose here is maybe one of the key messages, which you don't get from a Wi-Fi network. That's much more of a single purpose because the carrier offload opportunity there is more limited. And so I think that really changes the nature of the comparison away maybe from the Wi-Fi comparison to more of the DAS compare. And there it's very, very favorable.
Now, nobody's mentioned EPC yet. Tell me what the EPC, who's the EPC, what role do they play? And do we really need a traffic?
That's one of the, one of the things about the cellular wireless protocol, why it has greater security and mobility and performance than Wi-Fi is because, the cellular standards are a complete network standard and not just a radio standard. And within that, there's something called an enhanced packet core, which is what EPC stands for. And these used to be kind of room-sized hardware systems that only the large carriers could afford to put in. And now they're really shrunk down to be, very low footprint software applications that can be deployed on premise or, in a data center that could serve multiple buildings within a metropolitan area. So that the cost of these systems has come down dramatically, but you do need that EPC to make the private LTE or the CBRS work. And again, I think that bundled into a managed service offering to take that complexity off the building owners' radar is the way to go.
Yeah, I think Rod makes a really important point. A lot of these things are necessary to take advantage of all these capabilities of CBRS. But as a building owner, depending on who you work with and how you work, you don't have to know about all of these. You don't have to procure all of these. These things can be done for you. And as Rod mentions, one of the big trends in the telecom industry has been virtualization of things, hardware basically turning to software. So a lot of this stuff like the EPC can be run in the cloud now. So it's not that you have to have something on premise. It's not that you have to know enough about it. It's important that who you're working with has one though.
Well, and there's tons of questions coming in from the audience, and I think we're probably going to turn to their questions in a minute. But one that's popped out is, and I think Rod, I think you said this, which is something that I had never heard, that the 3.5 gigahertz frequency is actually an international standard. Is that correct?
Yes, as part of the 5G deployments in big markets like China and Europe are all centered on the 3.5 gig frequencies, right? That's where the bulk of 5G subscribers around the world are. And what that means to us here is just that the ecosystem is so powerful, right? You've got, millions of chipsets that are going to be produced to go into the China market or Korean market, European market. That's all benefiting us in the US market.
And the reason, John, that's so popular and that is a world standard is because it works well at 3.5. So that's a terrific opportunity because it can broadcast well. It's not this, millimeter wave that's going to have trouble penetrating, but it really works well for in-building.
Yeah, the term you'll hear for it is mid-band. So a lot of carriers have operated in the 6, 7, 800 megahertz low band. You hear about millimeter wave, that's the high bands. 3.5 is that mid-band. So again, I'm going to use the Goldilocks analogy again. It's just right for the range it gets, the amount of data that you can carry on. The other comment I'd make quickly here is that while the 3.5 spectrum is used around the world, the spectrum sharing arrangement that the FCC has embarked on and what is CBRS in the US is novel and new, but don't expect it to be the last time this happens. That sharing is likely going to happen internationally, maybe in this band, but it also may happen in the US in other bands. As we open other bands up, as this works well, it may be a way, again, to democratize more spectrum going forward.
Well, I always in my life, I try to surround myself with people who are smarter than I am, because that's the only way I can learn. And I clearly got lucky with this panel because every one of you have really contributed and to me and my knowledge along the way here. So thank you all. Ash, I'm going to turn it over to you and we can start taking some questions from the audience if that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a phenomenal panel. I mean, we have a lot of questions that came from the audience, so we'll do our best to get through as many as we can. So I'll start combining a few of the questions. The first one came in early, and then I know we touched upon it early as well, but a question came in from Virginia. She asked, what is the security on the spectrum? Who manages the spectrum, participants, and the allocation of bandwidth? So it's a security related question. What is the security protocol for the spectrum?
I think Rod or Paul, you want to grab that one?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two parts to that question. I mean, one was how is the spectrum allocated? And that goes back to what Rich was describing is this spectrum access service, which is a database system that, understands what systems, what networks are where and allocates the spectrum fairly between them. So that kind of answers, I think, that part of the question. And then on the security side, as John Miko had described earlier, right, it's really an end-to-end two-way authentication protocol so that the handset or the end user device knows it's a secure network and the network knows it's an authorized user. And that's really built into the cellular standards that have demonstrated secure access across billions of users in the world.
Paul, you want to add?
No, I think I could just screw it up. I mean, first off, I'm trying to follow up on somebody who was a former CTO of AT&T, and even without a title, smarter than me. So I'll leave it at that.
Great.
Awesome.
Ash,
Yeah,
fire
absolutely.
away.
What is involved in getting a private LTE network? Who installs it and maintains it?
I'd be
That's a good
happy
one
to
for
take
Paul.
that one. So there are a huge number of competent companies in the industry that can help with that. But one of the important aspects here is it takes a stack of companies to do this. And so that anyone who's looking for a CBRS network should look for the most competent company that they possibly can that has credentials in this area. Certainly there are companies on this call, on this video link that are capable of doing that, but they will bring in other members of the team for the equipment, for the core, for interconnection to the other carriers like GeoVerse does. But it takes as we used to say, it takes a village. It takes a stack of companies to do this. But there are lots and lots of companies. Certainly we have resources at Connected Real Estate to guide people. But I think that the amount of companies out there that have jumped into this space is enormous right now. And look for the most competent companies that can answer the kinds of questions that we've been talking about on this video today to help.
And I would just add to that, find people who actually are either already understand the owner's issues or are open to understanding them. Because if somebody comes in and they're going to do it their way, and well, wait a minute, time out. The owner's got things that they want to get done. That's the person I'd look for.
That's awesome. A question came in from Charmaine. Will this be sent to us afterwards? Yes, Charmaine, this will be live on cretech.com/events, so you can view it there. Another question came in from Barry. I would like to hear the panel's perspective on timeline and hurdles for MNO acceptance for private CBRS deployment. Any thoughts on MNO acceptance of private CBRS
Yes,
deployments?
I can touch on that first.
Yeah,
Paul, if
go ahead.
you
Go
want to
ahead.
hop in. So for me, I mean, back to the kind of the cellular voice component of this for tenants where, we use distributed antenna systems today to solve for voice challenges in a building. For this to become scalable as a solution to solve for that challenge, there's going to need to be roaming agreements essentially between the individual building level networks and the carrier networks. So, that needs to take place before this is ubiquitous and scalable for that specific application. But I think with the amount of money that the carriers are spending year over year on 5G rollouts for the outdoor network, it's $17 billion this year. The private network can really serve as an ideal offload for a lot of that infrastructure to avoid them having to try to figure out how to raise capital to service individual buildings and clients. So I think that it's not necessarily a near-term thing, but it is on the horizon, and it's something that is a matter of when and not if.
So yeah, and I would just add that for carriers, they look at outdoor CBRS and indoor CBRS. On outdoor CBRS, they very much consider outdoor their realm, and they want to solve that on their own. MVNOs, on the other hand, they don't mind having CBRS outdoors because they can, whether it's Google Fi or Comcast or people like that, they could offload traffic. Indoors, carriers are much more amenable to using a CBRS network because they have a massive coverage challenge indoors, and they have not been able to address it with CBRS. You know, maybe 2% of buildings it's really economical to cover with DAS, and now all of a sudden the market has opened up and it's more cost effective. The other thing I would say is that the roaming model that John mentioned is one model, but the way CBRS is constructed, when a carrier has a radio talking to a handset, it publishes what's called a PLMNID. We won't go into detail, but it makes it look like the carrier's network. So with CBRS, what was done in this construct is I can broadcast something inside of John's building, for example, where it looks to a Verizon handset like it is the Verizon network. Not that it's roaming, that it looks like it's the Verizon network. That allows a carrier to have its same service as if it was outdoors. They're attracted to that. So I think the hurdles are falling pretty fast. And I think the economic models work if it's used for the MNOs and for the building use.
Yeah.
I get that question. Typically, I look to Rod, you know, in the GeoVerse's role in this situation.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, the navigating that relationship between the building owners and the MNOs is a critical aspect here. And having been in the, you know, the other side of that relationship, right? I mean, it's still from AT&T's perspective, Verizon's perspective, T-Mobile, it's their brand on the phone. And, you know, they're going to be very concerned about what quality of experience are my subscribers going to have on this network over which I've got relatively little control. And so one of the things that we feel is really important is to develop a set of quality of experience indicators that can be fed back to the carriers so that they understand, you know, the quality that their customers are getting on these enterprise provided networks, because I think that'll be key to the adoption. I think the other thing on timing is, you know, how quickly the CBRS frequencies coming into the handset base, the user base of the carriers. And I think that's, you know, proceeding really well. And you know, all the 5G phones have the CBRS spectrum in them. The 5G iPhone, I think, was going to drive a wave of adoption there. So I think you'll see within a year or two that, you know, most of the people coming into your buildings are going to have a compatible phone. And so I think within the next, you know, 1 to 2 years, you'll see this really start to ramp in terms of using CBRS as a neutral host.
Awesome. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. And to Darlene's point earlier when she said that, you know, we're out there in the built world, we're super connected, we come into buildings, we're super deconnected. In order to get connected within buildings, there is the cost. And a question came in from Jack. Who is going to pay for the infrastructure in the buildings, the carrier, or is the real estate owner expected to own in building networks?
It's really how you want to structure it. Clearly, the owner could come in and, you know, put this all in. It's from Ruden's standpoint. I don't really want to be in between my customer and the carriers. So we're going to look for a neutral host to come in and develop this for us.
Awesome. And then one last question. How can we get mass adoption of CBRS within buildings?
Well, I'll take that one. I think I think the industry owes John a great debt of gratitude for bringing up this topic and bringing it out in the open. I don't think there's anybody that's been speaking about it as much as John. And I think that's the way it's going to get mass adoption as landlords get familiar with it. I did a webinar with TIA about a week ago, and one of the questions that came in was when we mentioned CBRS, question came in, what's that? So, you know, we still see lots and lots of opportunity for the real estate business, the industrial real estate folks, residential, and, you know, the ecosystem to better understand what this can bring to them.
Yeah, and also, you know, from an end user standpoint, I think there's really 4 things that we're looking for in terms of these types of technologies. First of all, from an operational standpoint, will it help run the buildings more efficiently? So will it support a more efficient building? Secondly, from an occupancy detection, will it help us with space utilization and understanding use of space and where our people are? Location-based services, is it something that will support location-based services as we continue to add applications specifically around the location of people within the facility? And last but not least, probably the most important, will it drive a better member experience and a better occupant experience for the actual people within the building? And so I think from our perspective, if it checks the box on all four of those, and it's able to be a 1 + 1 = 5, because it will be able to, solve a lot of those issues and those use cases for us. I think that's really what we're looking for.
And I think, Ash, back in 1995, when we began redeveloping 55 Broad Street, we changed the real estate moniker of location, location, location to location, bandwidth, location. And this is an opportunity. I can't remember any time where the federal government gave anything to property owners for free. Well, here it is. And guess what? It's a big, fat pipe that you can do enormous things with and ultimately meet that moniker. And it's wireless and it's mobile. And now suddenly that location, bandwidth, location is actualized, and all of us should be taking advantage of it.
John, I absolutely love that. And I could not have ended it any better than that. I 100% agree with you. And I see we're about a minute over. That's all the time that we have for today's conversation. Darlene, John, Paul, Rich, Rod, and John, thank you all for sharing your thought leadership, and thank you to the Real Estate Board of New York. I hope everyone, including our amazing audience, our community, had a great time. I certainly absolutely did. This was a very much needed conversation, especially in the city of New York and especially now. Again, my name is Ashkan Zandia, and it's been a pleasure to be your host today. Thank you to our amazing audience and our thought leaders today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ash.
Thank you, Ashton.
Thanks, Ash.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a great week.